The radiation was getting worse. Minute by minute, all people in Pripyat were unknowingly acquiring higher and higher doses. Yet, there was still no idea how to cover the reactor. And what was even worse, there was no word on the evacuation. Last time I told you about how Chernobyl accident impacted Moscow on the calm night of April 26, 1986. You could hear who got the call, how the information was passed on, and who was involved in the decision making in the first moments. This time it will be a bit different. We will jump forward to the moment when Legasov and Shcherbina were already in Pripyat. I think today's episode will make you think about the victims of the disaster, because you will hear about radiation readings in the city and about the tough issues the experts encountered in the soon-to-be Chernobyl exclusion zone. Take some snacks or drinks and sit comfortably. It's not going to be the easiest episode to watch, but this story demands telling it. Let's start. The People of Chernobyl, Part 8. Why do it here? It was the first hours since the investigation of the government committee started. By then, Legasov already knew the grave mistake of Chernobyl operators. Their efforts to keep the water flowing into the reactor core were heroic, but completely useless. The experts of all three teams were working separately, yet they shared all the information. But the final decisions at Pripyat lay within the reach of only one person, Boris Shcherbina. He already took responsibility and started giving orders, but obstacles were appearing one after another. The first one was quite simple: the political and economic reasons. Experts in Chernobyl requested the necessary resources to make the chemical solution that was supposed to entangle radioactive particles, or rather slow down the neutron flux. There were not enough of them in Pripyat, so they reached out to Rivne nuclear power station. However, its director was not complying. He was reluctant to send tons of powder. Why? Because of purely practical reasons. He was in control of his own nuclear station. What if a similar accident happened again, this time in Rivne? Remember that in the first hours and days after the disaster, no one could be really sure it wasn't some kind of sabotage by foreign forces. Stocking the materials necessary for every situation was one of the many issues of the Soviet economy. The central planning often made Moscow not care about how the goals were reached. So a person managing any factory or station had to include shortages, which were a common problem. Sometimes it was absurd. If the power plant didn't have any coal to burn, the director could be held responsible for power shortage even though he didn't have any possibility to produce that power. That's why Rivne's director was hesitating to send any help. It was a real threat to him that a similar situation may occur in his station. Even if not, he couldn't be sure when his own supplies would be refilled, if they ever would be. Despite that, after some calls were made, the Rivne director finally sent a truck with that powder. But as it happened a lot in the Soviet Union, the truck was in such a bad condition that it broke down. So the team in Pripyat had to wait an additional 24 hours before the needed resources would arrive. Legasov understood that the only thing power plant workers achieved was filling the basements of units 3 and 4 with radioactive water. The other result was even worse. Water changed to steam, and steam carried whole clouds of radioactive particles into the air. Then, these particles began to spread across a huge part of Europe. At the same time, another process was going on that joined the troubles with steam. Radioactive aerosols were carried into the air too, because the former reactor number 4 left only a crater now. Prushinsky had briefly seen the vicinity of Unit 4. He saw things that were almost certainly pointing to the unimaginable scale of the accident. glowing fuel cells and spots suggested that there was still something burning up. At this point, the scientists in Pripyat understood that the reactor had to be sealed. How? No one knew that. The core's inside was identified. There was no question that somehow it, or something near it, exploded with a force hard to imagine. The debris scattered around the buildings and even on top of them was acting like a deadly shield, as if the burning core wanted to protect itself. There were several ideas. Maybe the most irradiated parts of the core could be covered by dropping concrete from the air, fight the fire by using foam or water like the British ones did in 1950s, or leave it now to be buried later to buy some time. But that was the issue. The most precious resource they had was running low. It was time. Radioactive clouds were traveling into the atmosphere second by second, and they had to do something to cover the burning reactor core. But the debris made the approach almost impossible. It created a radioactive minefield that would destroy every human being that would try to get close to it. Because of that, covering the reactor was not an option, as it couldn't be reached. All three teams of experts and available specialists from Pripyat and Chernobyl were beginning to realize that this mission demanded titanic work and a brave heart. However, they all agreed that it was a priority to cover the reactor. No one knew how to do it. Legasov once spoke about the memories of these moments, how he caught the eyes of terrified scientists, paralyzed technicians, and ignorant politicians. Everyone knew something had to be done. But the question was, what? When the party leaders gathered in the White House in Moscow, they couldn't agree on the evacuation of the people from Chernobyl and surrounding areas. It was all debated while the scouts sent by Marshal Akromiev to Pripyat were taking radioactivity readings one after another, hour by hour, and the results were far from soothing. One of the examples of how bad the situation was, and how it was getting worse by every minute, was the readings from a street about 3 kilometers away from the Unit 4 building. At about 3 p.m., they recorded 0.5 Röntgen an hour, which is 4.66 millisieverts. That's almost double the normal annual background radiation dose absorbed by every human being every hour, just in that spot. A few hours later, the reading was not only bad, it was horrifying. It showed 1.8 Röntgen per hour, which meant being at that spot for a day would put the person in need of immediate emergency care because of the possible acute radiation syndrome. This was thousands of times higher than regular background radiation in just one spot in Pripyat, 3 kilometers away from the burning reactor core. And despite that information being given to the party leaders, they still discussed whether to evacuate the city or not. But you have to understand that the communists of the Soviet Union had a high threshold for such events. The Deputy Minister of Health of the USSR said that it posed no immediate threat to the population. A healthy adult who spent a week in Pripyat at that moment would have about 40 to 50% chance of dying after acquiring such a radiation dose. Yet, the deputy minister stood his ground. He even recalled the 1957 disaster in Mayak, which was still not publicly known in 1986. They never evacuated people there, he said. Why do it here? So we got to the point where I needed to stop this part of the story. In the next video I will tell you more about the debates on the Pripyat evacuation and what the experts on site had to say about it. I will also describe the radiation issues shortly, including some basic knowledge of how it works, what the doses are and similar subjects. I hope you have enjoyed this video. It was kind of sad to write this scenario because I was thinking about all the people in Pripyat who didn't even know what happened. And someone far away, in a safe place, was debating on whether they should be informed or not. And if so, should they be evacuated or not? That's one of the horrors of the Soviet Union throughout all its history. The people were often the means to an end. Numbers. The Communist Party leaders were more worried about panic or international relations than about their own countrymen. Children, women, men, elders. They all were unnecessarily left in Pripyat because a bunch of older politicians couldn't agree on such an important matter. Anyway, I feel like these stories need to be told. For us to remember the wrong decisions and hopefully never make the same mistakes again. And to learn about how a totalitarian system can destroy thousands of lives without hesitation. That's it for today. Have a good evening or morning, guys. Take care, stay safe, and see you next week.